Welcome to today's workshop. So I have in the past given you a workshop about writing an essay, but it was mostly broadly. So I just, well, it was in depth, but it was the core of each essay. But now there's different steps that you take when you are dealing with different types of essays. So in today's workshop, we're going to be looking at define what an essay is, then we'll look at the different types of essays. We are going to start with what an argumentative essay is and how to approach an argumentative essay, the narrative essay, how to approach it, the expository essay, and comparative essays, because there's different ways in which you structure each of these essays. So they have a core, which is an introduction, body, and conclusion, but there's some small differences between each of these essays. So an essay is a short piece of writing which is set around a specific topic or subject. This piece of writing will give you information surrounding the topic, but will also display the opinion and thoughts of the author. And the author here, it's you, right? So it will display your opinions and thoughts, of course, in the third person. So often an essay is used in an academic sense by the way of examination in order to determine whether a student has understood their studies and as a way of testing their knowledge on a specific subject, right? So that is the reason why you're usually tested through an essay, you know, be it assignments, exams, or tests. An essay is used in education as a way of encouraging students to develop their writing skills. So unlike multiple choice questions where you just options of a variety are provided to you to choose from, with an essay you actually have to write, right? So it improves your writing skills. It improves your critical thinking, which is the workshop that we'll be addressing tomorrow. So an essay is really a good way to test your knowledge. So an essay is like a human body, as we discussed with the academic workshop, that is made up of different parts, and each one of them are very important. So these parts form a whole, right, and makes it coherent. So just as I mentioned at the beginning, the basic essay has an introduction, body, paragraphs, and conclusion. So does each of those four types of essays, right? They still have the same major structure. So the introduction in all of these type of essay will introduce the topic you're discussing. It will briefly summarize the points that you will be discussing in the paragraphs, and you usually do this in the last sentence that we call, you know, indicating the outline, right? So this is where you state your thesis, and the thesis is a sentence that states the main idea of a writing assignment and helps control the idea within the paper. So your thesis is the most important part of your essay because it's the point you're making. It needs to take a clear stand and shouldn't include hedging language that undermines that stance, like seems to, possibly, could. So these words usually, you know, it's like you're not sure of your stand. So let's discuss the body. So we will look at this into more details in the next section. So we'll still look at the thesis in especially the argumentative essay. So that is broadly the introduction. So in the introduction, you introduce the topic and then you provide a thesis and you indicate the outline. Then in your body paragraphs, you know, this is where you now support your thesis, and you support your thesis through topic sentences, supporting sentences, and concluding sentences. And this is also where you provide evidence to support your arguments. And this evidence are usually provided in the form of referencing. So you take an academic journal that has already conducted the research, and then you support your ideas or your arguments. So if you're not sure whether you should include a specific point or detail in your body paragraph, refer back to your thesis statement. If the detail supports your thesis it should be in your essay. If it doesn't support your thesis, then leave it out. Your thesis statement is the core of your basic essay structure. So everything else in the essay needs to directly relate to it some way. So I'll give an example. There was a question about discussing the changing nature of a relationship between the main character and Desiree. The focus is on the narrative essay and characterization. So for example, what are you discussing in this question? There's two strands in this question. So it's the changing relationship, but it is discussed within narrative perspective and characterization. So that is the thesis, which means everything has to directly link to that, which means you discuss the narrative perspective and show how the relationship changed. You discuss characterization and show how the relationship changed. So everything is built on to that thesis statement. Then, of course, the conclusion of your essay, you simply summarize the points that you've made, you restate your thesis, and then you can now provide concluding remarks. So now let's look at the different types of essays. So I was just giving you a brief introduction or summary about, the structure of a normal essay before we get into the specific types of essays. So when it comes to writing an essay, there is not simply one type. There are in fact quite a few types of essays, and each of them have their own purpose and function. We are now going to look into each of these into more details. So in this workshop, we'll be looking at 4 types of essays that students are mostly required to discuss, or these are the most common essays in academics. So we have your narrative essays, and most students in the field of journalism, they mostly write narrative essays. And then we have your descriptive essays, we have your expository essays. Descriptive and expository are common in psychology and developmental studies. Then we have argumentative essays that are mostly common in education. So let's look at these essays. So your argumentative essay is a piece of writing that takes a stance on an issue. In a good argumentative essay, a writer attempts to persuade, right? I want you to note this because this is the most important thing about an argumentative essay, right? So an argumentative essay persuades the readers, persuade. So you have to persuade them. You have to make them believe in what you are telling them, believe in your argument, believe in your stand, right? And support their point of view about a topic by stating their reasoning and providing evidence to back them up. So you attempt to persuade the reader, you support your stand, your arguments, and this is usually supported by enough evidence, right? So the argumentative essay is one which is used to present an argument surrounding 2 sides of an issue, right? So generally an argumentative essay will go like, do you believe in equality between men and women, for example, So there's 2 stands there. You either believe in it and then you give reasons why they could be equal, or you don't and you give reasons why they could be they can't be equal. Or South African education is the best in Africa. It's either you agree to that statement or you disagree to that statement. If you agree, then you will provide support for that argument. If you disagree, then same thing, you will give reasons why you disagree. This section of the argumentative essay, just like a normal essay, will include what we call a hook and the thesis statement and the general outline of the essay. So you see that in terms of structure, it's not really different from your basic essay in the sense that it still has an introductory sentence. It will still have the thesis statement. It will still have an outline to what needs to be discussed in the essay. However, there is a difference with the argumentative essay, which is the refutation, which I'll mention as we go. So the first paragraph of your essay should outline the topic, provide background information necessary to understand your argument. So you introduce the topic, provide any definitions or any background information, outline the evidence you present, then state your thesis. The thesis statement, this is part of your first paragraph. It is concise. It has to be one sentence of your main point and claim. Your thesis statement is only one sentence long, but it's the most important, right? It is the most important part of your entire essay because it presents your argument. And remember, you will build everything based on this, right? Everything will be built based on that thesis. So the thesis appears in your introduction. It summarizes what the argumentative essay will be all about, right? So these are the steps that you can use to come up with a thesis statement. And the reason I'm focusing on this is because although it's one sentence, it's usually not easy. It's a very difficult thing to do sometimes, you know. So the first thing you can do is turn the topic into a question and answer it. So set up a big question in the title of your essay or within the few sentences, then build up to answering that question in your thesis. So for example, in your title or introduction, you could pose the question, what is the best type of sandwich? And then answer with your thesis statement. The best type of sandwich is peanut butter and jelly. This method is effective because intriguing question draws readers in and encourage them to keep reading to find the answer. So in academic writing, you can use this step in your mind map and then simply write your thesis statement in the introduction. But asking a question will guide you, or looking at the question and answering the question directly. So in one sentence, answer that question that the lecturer gave you, and that will be your thesis statement. Another example, if the question was discuss stereotypes within education, right? Then the thesis statement will be the stereotypes within education will be the main focus of this essay. So that is your thesis. So it's a direct answer to the question. So to state an argument and then refute it. Now, I told you when we started that there's something that is very specific with the argumentative essay is what we call the refutation, right? So with the argumentative essay, unlike other essays where you simply state the purpose or you simply state the thesis, with the argumentative essay, you have to refute it. So what is the refutation? Introduce an idea that contrasts with your belief and immediately explain why you disagree with it, right? So it's like you say, although I believe that South African education is the best education in Africa. Although there are others that claim that it is not, this essay shows that it is indeed. So you see that I have mentioned what others are saying about my topic. That is the refutation. But then you come back to say, you know what, your essay will prove that it is actually, you know, your argument is actually the best. So let's see the example I have here. While some people believe peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are too simple, they are versatile sandwiches that you can easily turn into a gourmet meal. So you see that Yeah, it started with a refutation. So why some believe peanut butter, and refutation is usually, you know, why some believe, although others believe, some researchers claim, you know, this is already indicating that although these people, because in academics, if you're in an argument, it's just like a debate. You know, you say, my opponents claim this, they said that, but we stand here today to prove them wrong, you know. But of course, in academic writing, you won't say you prove them wrong, but you simply state your claim. You say this, the opponents are saying this, they are saying that. So state your argument and refute it, right? So as I was saying, it's like, you know, you presenting the other side of the argument, but saying that, you know, your side is the strongest, right? And this is very important in academic writing, because in academic writing, it's very important to acknowledge others, right? So you acknowledge others, and when you acknowledge others, it kind of makes your argument stronger. But if you don't, it's like, you know, you're avoiding the other side, or you think maybe if you mention the other side, then it will make your argument weaker. So, you know, just stay away from it. But please, in an argumentative essay, is very important. And this is what makes an argumentative essay different from all other essays, right? It is the refutation. So please always remember to refute. If you don't refute, then basically you don't have an argument, right? Your argument will be weak and you will lose marks. So thirdly, briefly outline your points, right? So introduce your main point and explain how you will back it up. So for example, you can turn a peanut butter and jelly sandwich into a gourmet meal by using artisanal bread, toasting bread, and additional toppings. So these three things now will form the three different parts of your essay. So it will help you organize your essay. So there are 5 types of argument claims, right? So once you've decided what you're arguing and know your thesis statement, consider how you present your argument. There are 5 types of argument claims that can drive your essay. So there is the fact, whether the statement is true or false, right? Then there's the definition, the dictionary definition of what you are arguing, plus your own personal interpretation of it. So they can provide you, for example, with a statement, and then you have to interpret that statement. You know, what are your opinions about the statement? Generally, you may disagree with the statement. The statement may be true, and then your entire essay is about showing how that statement is true, or showing how that statement is not true. And your refutation in this case, for example, will be providing maybe a paragraph why the statement could be true, but however it's not. So value, this is where you provide the importance of what you are arguing. Then there's the cause and effect, where what causes the problem in your essay and what effects it has. Then there's the policy argument, why the reader should care and what they should do about it after reading. So these are the different types of arguments that when teachers are asking questions on argumentative essays, so it could be a question on policy, it could be a question on cause and effect, it could be a question of the importance of something, it could be a question about a definition or a statement, it could be a true or false question. Okay, so there are 3 main ways to structure an argumentative essay, right? So you choose one of the following or combine them to write your persuasive paper. Remember, the persuasion is the main thing in an argumentative essay. So the first one is the classical, right? So in the classical type of argumentative essay, you present the main argument, state your opinion, and do your best to convince the reader why your stance is the right one. So, also called the Aristotelian, this is the most popular strategy for making an argument because it's simplest line of thinking to follow. It's effective when your audience doesn't have a lot of information or a strong opinion about the topic, as it outlines the facts clearly and concisely. Then you have, so when I send the presentation, you will see here, this is, the main focus of a classical, right? Then if you go to the Rotarian, you present the problem. Here you present the problem. You acknowledge the opposite side of the argument, right? Remember, we're still doing the argumentative essay. Then you state your point of view, right? Then you explain why yours is the best and the most beneficial to the reader. But if you go back here, you start by presenting the main argument. So then you state your opinion, and then you just convince the readers about it. But you see here that the Rotarian, you present the problem first, and then you acknowledge the opposite side, and then you state your point of view and explain why your point of view is the best. And this is usually the method that I advise most students to use, because this to me is the strongest in terms of argument. It really puts your point through. Okay, so this type of argument is effective for polarizing topics, as it acknowledges both sides and presents the middle ground. Then we have the tall mean. Present your claim, present grounds to back up that claim, and then justify the grounds that are linked to the claim. So this type of argument is also effective for polarizing topic, but rather than presenting both sides, it presents one, hinging particularly on the fact presented in a way that makes the claim difficult to argue. So you present just your facts, and then you present so many evidence, so much evidence that the reader will be convinced, right? But once again, I think the Rogerian is the best strategy, the best way to me to answer your argumentative essays. So for the Tolmin, the Rogerian, and the classical, I will usually advise students to use the Rogerian, because when you refute your claim or you acknowledge the opposite side, it makes the reader know that, you know what, I do acknowledge the opposite side. However, my claim is strongest, because then you provide the evidence why yours is stronger. Yes, this is also nice because you focus on providing claims why yours is stronger. But again, I believe presenting the opposite side is even better. But however, sometimes the lecturers might tell you or give you an indication as to how they want you to address the argumentative essay. Okay, so please make note: argumentative essay, persuasion, refutation, right? Rogerian, so that when I send the presentation to you, you know what to focus on. Okay, let's look at the body of an argumentative essay. If we follow the Rogerian, the argumentative essay can also be, presented a little bit differently. So the body of the essay is where you fully develop your argument, right? So remember, in the introduction, you have presented your argument. Now in the body, you will be, fully developing this argument into fully fledged ideas, right? So each body paragraph should contain one key idea. And this is very important. I reiterate this because often students will, discuss 2-3 ideas in one paragraph. I do understand that there are cases where you can discuss couple ideas in one paragraph. However, this is when you have a bigger topic and you're discussing like smaller topics within. So I'll give an example with the cause and effect AC. And the instruction is maybe provide maximum between 3 to 5 paragraphs. So once you've been given a limit like that, obviously you will discuss the causes, effects, and solution in each paragraph. So for example, you discuss all the causes in one paragraph. You can discuss the effects in another paragraph. You can discuss the solution in another paragraph, or you can discuss the cause, effect, solution, cause, effect, solution. Because you see that if you now have to discuss each cause in each paragraph, then it's going to be too many paragraphs. Then you will exceed the word limit, you will exceed the assignment instruction, right? Because another way will be, I will discuss, if I say I'm discussing 3 causes, 3 effects, and 3 solutions, then I can discuss each of the cause and effect in each paragraph and discuss the 3 solutions. So that will give me about 6 paragraphs for the body and introduction and conclusion. You see that this is a huge paragraph, but when you have word limits and you have paragraph limitation, then you can now decide to discuss the causes in 1 paragraph, effects in 1 paragraph, solutions in 1 paragraph. And the introduction and conclusion, when you join that, you see that you have your 5 paragraphs. So it will guide you as to how many paragraphs to contain, but make sure you're discussing 1 key idea or claim in a paragraph. Then you support it with relevant examples and evidence from the body of scholarly work on your topic, right? So as I always tell students, you know, the essay has, you know, you have 1, you have your topic sentence, and then 2, you have to explain this topic sentence, and then 3, you now provide examples and evidence to support your explanation, and then you end off now by concluding this evidence. So in the standard 5 paragraph format for short essay, the body takes up 3 of your 5 paragraphs. So just as I explained earlier, you have your 3 paragraphs, and then you have the introduction and the body. In long essays, it will be more paragraphs and might be divided into sections with subheadings, okay? So the body of an argumentative essay. Each paragraph covers its own topic, introduced with a topic sentence. Each of these topic sentences must contribute to the overall argument, so don't include irrelevant information. And as I always tell students, this is also difficult not to include irrelevant questions. But I am here to guide you. If you are confused with that, just book with me with your assignment and I'll be able to guide you. Let me give an example of a work that I just reviewed. Of course, I'm not mentioning any name. So I reviewed a work and the student was talking about characterization, right? And they were talking about the personality, and the character was being rude. So the student was mentioning that the character was rude. Then the student included a quote, a direct quote from the source that was talking about love. It was talking about something completely different. It wasn't saying or mentioning anything about rudeness, right? So you could see now that the example or the quote that the student provided was totally different from the argument. So that is when we say a student is off topic. So you're saying something, but then your evidence or your research or the data that you provide is completely different from your argument, from what you're trying to prove. So that is when you go off topic, and you lose a lot of marks for when you go off topic, right? So that is why when I'm reviewing your work, the first 2 drafts, I can even take to the 3rd draft if you're not answering the question, if you're not focusing on the question, before I focus on the coherence and the grammar. Why? Because if you're not answering the question, it doesn't matter how much good language you use. It doesn't matter if it's coherent, and which is also, it works together, because it's difficult for your work to be coherent if you go off topic, right? So I always focus on the content and the coherence first before going on the language and grammar. So an example of a paragraph that takes a Rogerian approach, remember our favorite approach, it first acknowledges the merits of the opposing position and then highlights the problem with that position, right? So your counter argument paragraph. The argumentative essay will take this structure. So you have 1, you have your introduction, and then 2, you will decide. You can, if let's say if you have 6 paragraphs, right? So the first will be your introduction, and of course the number 6 will be the conclusion. So with the counter argument paragraph, what happens is you can decide to have that as the first paragraph, right? Or you have it as the last. Generally, it's not in the middle. It's either you start with your counter argument and then you spend the 3 other paragraphs to refute it and prove your stance, Or you start by presenting your opinion, and then you end by refuting it and claiming that the first three above, you proved your point. So if the first paragraph is, the counter argument paragraph, so for example, you will say, although others, claim that South Africa is the best education in Africa, this essay will show that South Africa is the second best, maybe followed by whatever country that you choose, right? So yeah, there you started with your counter argument, then you spend the next 3 paragraphs to prove your point. Or you start by proving your point, so you show that South Africa is the best education. So in these 3 paragraphs, you show that SA is the best, right? So you're proving SA here. Then you come on the last paragraph now, you state that, however, it should be noted that some authors claim that South Africa is not the best because of 1, 2, 3, but this essay has shown above and has proven beyond doubt that South Africa is the best based on the evidence shown. So you get my point. So it's something like that. So you either start with the counter argument, you prove it, or you prove it first and then you mention the counter argument. But remember to refute it at the end, which is you saying, although they are saying this essay, or you have, of course, you don't use the first person, this essay has proven through data and through evidence that South Africa is indeed the best form of education in Africa. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute your mic, ask me the question, or you can do so in the chat. The chat is open, so I'm constantly looking at the chat to see if you have any questions. Then when you're done with your paragraphs now, you will write your conclusion. And the difference, once again, with an argumentative essay, it's simple. Even in your conclusion, you will also include the refutation part, right? You just mention it as well. So now let's look at the next essay. Let's look at the narrative essay. A narrative essay is one which details a story, often from a particular point of view. When writing a narrative essay, you should include a set of characters, location, and a good plot, and the climax of the story. So you will see that narrative essays are also common in journalistic writing. It's also common in literature. So literature, you can sometimes have a narrative essay, but sometimes you can also have an argumentative essay. And also in English, you can also have a narrative essay. The main purpose of a narrative essay is to tell the reader about events, interactions, and experience that have happened to you during a particular period of time. It always has a vivid plot, right? So you will see that the narrative essay focuses a lot on the plot, so events and things, so sharing things that actually happen. It is vital that when writing this type of essay, you use fine details to allow the reader to feel the emotion and use their senses, but also give the story the chance to make a point, right? So although you're telling a story, you still need to have a point. The point of the essay should be mentioned early on, preferably in the opening line, but if not, certainly within the introduction paragraph. You should also write this type of essay in either the third person or the first person. And unlike a creative writing story, you should always be based around facts. So that is what makes a narrative essay different from, writing a fictional story or writing a creative essay. So it will be the facts, right? So same like with the argumentative essays, you have to provide evidence for your arguments or for your points. So how would the introduction of a narrative essay look like? So the introduction of a narrative essay is the paragraph that begins your story. In the introduction, you describe the setting, you introduce the characters, and you prepare your audience for the action to come. Of course, the introduction should have a hook and a thesis. So let's look at this. So the hook in the narrative essay usually is the first few sentences that grabs the reader's attention, right? So hooks are especially important in narrative essays because they help set the stage for the story. The hook makes the reader start guessing about what will happen next. So the hook should make the reader ask the following questions, right? The why, the who, the what, and the where. So your hook should make them ask these questions. Then the thesis is the most important thing as well in the organization. However, in the narrative essay, the thesis introduces the action that begins in the first paragraph of the essay. So the thesis in the narrative essay is the statement, do not tell the readers what happens. They only introduce the action that will follow. So the paragraphs in the body will develop the story. So you simply tell the reader that, this essay will be addressing 1, 2, 3, and 4. So in the narrative essay, your thesis is more like a purpose statement that tells the reader what will follow instead of presenting an argument like you do in the argumentative essay, right? So it usually do not present an argument, but it simply explains to the reader what will follow or what will be discussed in the body of your essay. And then you now go on to the body of your essay to explain this further. So once you have grabbed the attention of your readers, now you can start your story. Gradually unfold the events of your story chronologically, right? Sometimes you can use dates, you can use events, but it needs to flow in a chronological manner, right? The body of your narrative essay contains most of the plot, the supporting information. The action in the plot can be organized in many ways. One way is chronologically or time order, as I've mentioned. In this method, each paragraph gives more information about the story as it proceeds in time. The first paragraph usually describes the first event, the second describes the second event, the third will describe the third event, and so on and so forth. Then you see that there is still coherence in your writing. So with the narrative essay, the main body is the section where your entire essay is concentrated. So you should include the following points. So just like the argumentative essay, make sure you discuss just one idea in one paragraph. Follow logical patterns and chronological order so that the reader can easily understand the storyline. Emphasize the experience and tell the universal truth that the story brings to the audience. So these are the things that you will focus on when discussing a narrative essay. So in an essay with a chronological organization, each paragraph ends with a transitional sentence. So just like with the argumentative essays, you need to have a concluding sentence. And the concluding sentence should be used to signal the end of the action in one paragraph and to provide the link to the action of the next paragraph. So as I had mentioned in the previous workshop, it's saying something like this paragraph has shown that unemployment is the main cause of poverty in Africa. However, lack of education can also lead to poverty in Africa. So you have concluded the previous paragraph and then introduced the next topic, which is lack of education. So these sentences are vital because they give your story unity and allow the reader to follow the action easily, right? Then your narrative essay, of course, again, will need to have a conclusion. So end your essay with a powerful and strong conclusion. Your essay can have a happy or sad ending depending on your story. So make sure that your essay serves the purpose and conveys your message. Here are the points to consider to leave the aftertaste. So you summarize the key points, remind your readers about the central message, and then give your readers something to think about. That is what we call the concluding remarks. It could be an advice, it could be recommendations, it could be strategies maybe to solve the problem that you discuss in your AC, right? So whatever will grab the reader's attention or give them something to think about, you know, or something to reflect on, then you can definitely use that in your conclusive paragraph. Like academic essays, narrative essays need to have concluding ideas. In the conclusion, you finish describing the action in the essay. The final sentence can have two functions. So the two functions are, of course, you know, reminding your readers about the central message and giving them something to think about. So let's look at the expository essay. Is a genre of essay that requires the student to investigate an idea, evaluate evidence, expound the idea, and set forth an argument concerning that idea in a clear and concise manner, right? So you investigate an idea, you evaluate the evidence of that idea, then you expound on that idea, and then set forth an argument concerning that idea in a clear and concise manner. This can be accomplished through comparison and contrast. It can be accomplished by defining. It can be done through examples or by analyzing the cause and effects. So an expository essay, please note that since I'm sharing my screen instead and I'm on slideshow, I'm unable to see the chat. So please, if you have any questions, if you can unmute your mic, please do so. If you ask in the chat, there's no problem. I will just address that after I am done with the presentation. Then I'll be able to address your question. So an expository essay is used as a way to look into a problem and therefore compare it and explore it. For the expository essay, there is little bit of storytelling involved, but this type of essay goes beyond that. The main idea that it should explain, the main idea is that it should explain an idea, giving information and explanation. So you provide the information and you explain the information. So your expository essay should be simple and easy to understand, as well as giving a variety of viewpoints on the subject. So unlike the argumentative essay where you present your point and the refutation, here you provide the different opinions that are available on that subject. Often this type of essay is used as a way to detail a subject which is usually more difficult for people to understand in a clear and concise manner. So expository is about the details, you know, providing as much details as you can and providing all the different viewpoints that exist in the set topic. So how will the introduction, or how should the introduction look like, right? So effective introductory paragraphs usually have at least 3 components, right? So same with the argumentative essay, same with the narrative essay, you do need an introduction. And with the expository essay, what should you include? So you tell the readers what the essay is all about. So the introductory paragraph will state the essay's topic in a very specific manner. So the main introduction paragraphs briefly describe the main points that will be explained, that will provide the main points that will be made to explain the topic. So secondly, your introduction in this type of essay needs to engage the reader, right? So the introductory paragraph should grab the audience attention. You can often do this by including amusing or unexpected statement. Sometimes the introduction challenges your audience to do or believe something surprising, right? So you have that wow statement in your expository essays. So sometimes a quote from an expert or a famous person can help interest your audience in your essay. So you can take a quote, you know, that kind of relate to what you're trying to say, and then you can include that quote in your introduction just to, you know, boost it a little bit. I think, for example, with my master's, I included a famous quote where Mandela is talking about the importance of education, and it really kind of gave a good opening to my introduction. So it's something like that. Then you tell the readers what they will get from the essay. So the last sentence of your introduction, 3 paragraphs, often foreshadows the conclusion of the essay. So you can get your audience interested in your topic by promising a rewarding conclusion. So you set out to do something, and then at the end you show how you have done it. So let's look at the body paragraphs. So the body paragraphs that include evidence should include evidential support in your expository essays. So each paragraph should be limited to one general idea, so that does not change. Even with expository essays, it's still one idea, one paragraph. This allows for clarity and direction. What is more, such conciseness creates an ease of readability for one's audience. So it is therefore important that you have concise and logical paragraphs that are connected to each other and still connected to the thesis statement in the opening paragraph. So what this essay set out to do. So evidential support, whether factual, logical, statistical, or anecdotal, you need to provide evidential support, right? Even with expository essays, you see that you need factual information, you need some kind of logic in your work, you need statistical information, dates, percentages, and all of that, anecdotal evidence. So any of these could work with as evidence in your work. So often students are required to write expository essays with little or no preparation. Therefore, such essays do not typically allow for a great deal of statistical or factual evidence, except of course you can get this evidence from those that have already written it, so from literature. So a bit of creativity. Though creativity and artfulness are not always associated with essay writing, it is an art form nonetheless. Try not to get stuck on the formulaic nature of the expository writing at the expense of writing something interesting, right? So remember that you may not be crafting the next great novel. You are attempting to leave a tasting impression on the people evaluating your essay, right? So the focus here is to make it interesting, to include, something that will really grab the reader's attention, something that is different, that will make your essay stand, out from other essays. So have that wow factor. Then, of course, the conclusion that does not simply restate the thesis, but readdresses it in a light of the evidence provided, right? So here you simply provide, restate your thesis that kind of summarizes the evidence that you provided in your expository essay. It is at this point of the essay that students will inevitably begin to struggle. This is the portion of the essay that will leave the most immediate impression on the mind of the reader. Therefore, it must be effective and logical. Do not introduce any new ideas into the conclusion. And please, this applies with all other conclusions. Avoid introducing new examples or new facts or new information. If you have anything to add, maybe add it in the body paragraphs or add a new body paragraphs, amend your introduction, then including the conclusion, because the conclusion is just restating or re-summarizing what has already been discussed in the essay. So the reader does not expect something new, except of course it's just concluding remarks, or you're providing solutions to the problems that you stated, or you're providing advice, or you're including a quote there to leave that aftertaste, to the reader. Of course, it needs to link again to your topic. Descriptive essays. Descriptive essays and expository essays are not that far from each other. So the introduction, body paragraphs, and conclusion will be very close to each other. So you follow the same steps. However, let's just look at what a descriptive essay is. So a descriptive essay provides a detailed sensory description of something, right? So please note here detail, right? Like narrative essays, they allow you to be more creative than most academic writing, but they are more tightly focused than narrative essays. So you might describe a specific place or object rather than telling a whole story, right? So the narrative essay will mostly focus on telling the whole story, but the descriptive essay will focus on describing a particular event, a particular place, or a specific object. Descriptive essays test your ability to use language creatively, making striking word choices to convey a memorial picture of what you are describing. A descriptive essay can be quite loosely structured, though it should usually begin with an introduction of the object, your description of the object, and then you end by drawing the overall picture of it. The important thing is to use careful word choices and figurative language to create an original description of your object. So you will see here that with the descriptive essay, this is where, you can use your metaphors, you use your ironies, your simile, onomatopoeia, hyperbole, you use all these figures of speech, characterization, or whatever the case, to kind of highlight or show. Imagery will also be very important here, to describe something. Because when you use figurative language to describe something, the description becomes more in-depth, it becomes interesting. So that is why the focus with descriptive essays is about, your word choices. You need to paint a picture, you need to describe it into details. And there's no way, it's very important when you describe, figurative language helps a lot in describing, presenting the overall picture. So, this is an example of a descriptive essay. Describe a place you love to spend time in. So they can ask you to describe a place you love to spend time in. So you will start, of course, in your introduction by introducing the place, giving a little background about the place. And then in your body now, you will go into describing the place into more details. Please remember, even with your descriptive essays, there need to be some kind of coherence, right? So it needs to flow from one aspect to the other. Let's say, for example, you want to describe your favorite place. Let's say it's your home, right? Maybe you might start by describing the building. Why does the building makes it the best place? Then you can move by maybe describing the inside of the building. Then you can describe each room in the building. Then you can describe the people that live within the building, because sometimes the people could be part of why it is your favorite place. So you have all these aspects that you want to discuss. Remember, you're going into details. Descriptive is about, detailed description. So this is the object, so it's your home, so but then you go into detail with each aspect of the home. So then what we're saying here is in your introduction, you will therefore, indicate different aspects that I've mentioned, that these are the aspects that, makes this place the favorite place for you, or the place you love to spend time the most, and you will explain why. Then you now please go in the same order. Start with the building that you said, then you explain it, use your word choices to show how beautiful it is, for example, the trees are as beautiful as, the breeze that, caresses the ocean, something like that. You've used figurative language there in a beautiful way to present or describe that object, such a way that your reader can close their eyes and they can see that object and actually understand why indeed it is the most beautiful place to you to spend time in. Then you move to the next. The people are as friendly as, whatever you think is friendly. They're always full of smiles. That reminds me of breakfast in the morning, things like that, that really shows, the audience can feel that description. They can close their eyes and see it, so that is how detailed, that's what makes descriptive essays different, the choice of words and the in-depth of the description. So let's just have a table that kind of has this 4 different types of essays. Then we're going to move to the last essay, which is comparative essays, right? So we've looked at argumentative essays. So the skills tested here, usually, your ability to form an opinion through research and, building that opinion through evidence, A good question for an argumentative essay will be, has the rise of the internet had a positive or negative impact on education? You will see here that with this question, it's actually asking you to take a stance. Has it had a positive or negative impact? So you see here that, for example, your opinion could be that it's had a positive impact. Then using the Rogerian description, you can, state that although others may say it has a negative impact because of the distractions that it can give because of cyberbullying. However, it has shown that it has more positive impact through, better connectivity, better communication, or whatever the reasons that you've chosen. Then you have your expository essays that usually test your knowledge about the topic and, test how much you're able to communicate clearly. So an example of an expository question will be, explain how the invention of the printing press changed European society in the 15th century. So here you have to explain, show examples, show evidence, show everything that you know about the printing press in the 15th century. So you can, as we said about expository essays, you can do this through anecdotals, you can do this through statistical information, you can do this through figures, read books that talk about the printing press in the European century, provide a lot of evidence, because remember, they're testing your knowledge about the printing press in that particular era. Then the narrative essay is usually has a lot of creative language, and you see that is why this is mostly used in journalistic writing, because you need to use a lot of creative language, presenting a compelling narrative. So are you able to actually present a compelling narrative? So an example of a narrative question will be, write about an experience where you learned something about yourself. That is a narrative essay. So in this essay, you'll be narrating, a particular experience that made you learn about yourself. And please remember the steps, your introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Then, of course, the descriptive essay, which, creative language. Remember, we said you're describing into detail. So, and there's a lot of similarities between the narrative and the descriptive, right? Because of the creative language use. So you will not only describe that language, with in simple terms like you will do in the argumentative and expository essay. With the narrative and descriptive essay, creative language is very important. So your metaphors, your ironies, onomatopoeia, hyperbole, use them all. Imagery to show, to describe. So creative language, so that your audience can feel, the sensory details are very important when it comes to the descriptive essays. So a question would be, for example, describe an object that has a sentimental value to you. So these are examples of the type of questions for each of these essays. So now let's look at our last essays. We're now looking at the last type of essay, that is your comparative essay. So what is a comparative essay? A comparative essay asks that you compare at least 2 items, right? It could be more, but when you're comparing something, at least there needs to be 2 items that you're comparing. These items will differ depending on the assignment. You might be asked to compare, for example, South African education and Zimbabwean education. You might be asked to compare two different political structures. You might be asked to compare two characters in a novel, right? Maybe compare the protagonist and the antagonist of the story. You might be asked to compare two different objects, right? So it's a very big, I mean, the list is inexhaustible. So, all right, so you can compare the position on an issue. So, for example, responses to midwifery in Canada and the United States. So there you're comparing your positions, right? So what are the responses when it comes to midwifery in Canada and the United States? You can compare two different theories, capitalism and communism, Marxism and feminism, you know, the list, there's a lot of theories. You can be asked to compare figures, maybe the GDP, gross domestic product in the United States and Britain, or in South Africa and Zimbabwe, or in Kenya and Uganda. You might be asked to compare different texts. You might compare, you know, Shakespeare, Hamlet and Macbeth. You can be asked to compare Juliet and Romeo, maybe, and King Lear. You might be asked to compare events, you know, the Great Depression and the financial crisis, or you might be asked to compare apartheid and slavery. You might be asked to compare, you know, objects as well. So although the assignment may say compare, the assumption is that you will consider both similarities and differences. In other words, you will compare and contrast. And I want you to note this because sometimes compare is providing similarities and contrast is providing differences. But what they're saying here is that even assignments that just say compare, usually when you compare, when you're providing a comparison of two things, it's important that you provide both the similarities and the differences. And that is one thing I want you to note in your notebook. You know, whenever you're comparing, you provide both the similarities and the differences. So let's look at the introduction. So start with a general point that establishes the similarity between the two subjects, then move to the specific focus of the essay. At the end of the introduction, write a thesis statement that first announces which aspects of each subject you plan to compare, and then state what conclusions you've drawn from them. Right? So with the comparative essay, you will present, you know, the two subjects. You know, let's assume you want to compare maybe capitalism and communism, right? So in your introduction, you start by introducing these two terms. You know, maybe give a brief introduction into capitalism, you give a brief introduction into communism, and then you state that, you know what, this essay will present so your thesis will be stating that this essay will be presenting both the similarities and the differences of communism and capitalism. And then it's very important that you now move to stating the different aspects that you'll be looking at in terms of these theories. So will you be looking at the economy within capitalism and, you know, communism? Will you be looking at the population? Will you be looking at the GDP? What exactly will you be looking at when addressing these two theories? So when doing your comparison, you now need to look at those, and that is very important with the comparative essay. So a good introductory paragraph sets the tone for your entire essay. The best introduction start with a hook. We already explained what a hook is, right? So something that grabs the reader's attention, introduces the topic, such as a rhetorical question or bold statement. After your hook, introduce the subjects that you will examine in your essay. Your thesis should come at the end of your introduction when you're looking at the comparative essay. So the body, right? And one thing I want you to note about the introduction, let me go back here. Let's say, for example, you are looking at the Great Depression, and the global financial crisis. So let's say you're comparing these two. What aspects will you be comparing? Let me pick something. Let's say you're comparing the South African education, right, in South Africa and Zimbabwe. So what aspects of education will you be comparing? That is very important, and it's very important that you mention that in your introduction. So for example, when discussing education, what aspects are important? The curriculum, for example, right? When you're looking at education, you look at the curriculum, you can look at the pedagogy, you can look at the financing. So in terms of the curriculum, you say maybe the Zimbabwean education uses this particular curriculum, while the South African Zimbabwe uses, for example, the O and A levels, the Cambridge education, while the South African, uses the matric, which is more of the Australian, then you go to the pedagogy. Which kind of pedagogy does Zimbabwe use? Which kind of pedagogy does South Africa uses? The finances, in terms of financing and the Department of Education in both countries, you compare them, what is how availability of scholarships in both countries. So you have like a stem that you use to compare both countries. But there's two ways to address a comparative essays. There's two structures that we'll look at. Let's go to that. So the difference in a comparative response is in the way the body paragraphs are structured and organized. You essentially have two basic options for the body, as I've mentioned, right? So the first structure is what we call the alternative method, point by point pattern. I also love calling this particular structure the zigzag, right? Because if you say A, B, if you just take a piece of paper and you say A, B, and you come under, you say A, B, and if you draw a line, you will see that it goes to A, B, and then comes back to A and B. So it gives you that zigzag structure, right? So in the alternative method, you find related points common to your central subject A and B, and then alternate between A and B based on the points. So this is the structure that I was telling you. So you have a stem, right? And that will be, for example, you're comparing the curriculum, and then you discuss the curriculum in Zimbabwe and the curriculum in South Africa. And then you go to the next stem, which is finances. You discuss finances in Zimbabwe, finances in South Africa. Then you go to the next one, maybe, which is scholarships. You discuss it in Zimbabwe, you discuss it in South Africa. So you have stems and you discuss it in, so in the one stem, in the same paragraph, you will discuss Zimbabwe and then you move to South Africa. Then your second paragraph is discussing another stem. You discuss it in one country and you discuss it in the other, right? So that is what we call the alternative method. And then the next method is what okay, we're still discussing the alternative method into more detail. So when do you use the alternative method, right? So professors often like the alternative method, or lecturers like the alternative system, because it generally does a better job of highlighting similarities and differences by juxtaposing your points about A and B. So it's clear, because I can clearly see that the curriculum in South Africa is this, while in Zimbabwe it's this. It's clear because you put them next to each other. So this is also my favorite method of comparison, the zigzag or alternative method, because you can immediately clearly see the differences between the two things that you're comparing. So consider the alternative method if you are able to identify clearly related points between A and B. Otherwise, if you attempt to impose the alternative method, you probably find it counterproductive. What we're saying here is there are certain instances where you're actually comparing two things, but there's no stem. Let's say, for example, you want to maybe talk about scholarships. This is just a broad example, and you realize that Zimbabwe education or system of education does not actually have scholarships. Like, it's not something that they include. Of course it is, but you know what I'm saying is with some topics you find that there's no stem to compare the two. So for example, one talks about completely different things, or the focus on completely different things. Let's say, for example, you're discussing the Great Depression, and maybe you want to compare, okay, let me go on theories, because sometimes theories do not have links. Let me maybe say you want to discuss Marxism, right? And social theory of social justice. And then you see that these two theories actually do not have a stem that works on both. So they talk about completely different things. And that's what makes them so different. But maybe they have similarities in that they focus on the population. But you see that there's no particular stem to compare the two. Then you can now go to what we call the block method, right? So the block method is subject by subject pattern. So in the block method is A, B. You discuss all of A and then you discuss all of B. And as I mentioned, this is especially when there's no stem to compare the two. So then you finish discussing all of the Marxism, and then you discuss the social theory. So if you're discussing Marxism in 3 paragraphs, you finish with that, and then you now discuss the social theory in 3 paragraphs, because they do not have stems to compare each other. So for example, a comparative essay using the block method on the French and Russian revolutions will address the French Revolution in the first half of the essay, and then address the Russian Revolution in the second half of the essay. If you choose the block method, however, do not simply append 2 disconnected essays to an introduction. The B block, or the second half of your essay, should refer to the A block, or the first half make clear points of comparison which are relevant. So unlike A, B, or like A, B, da, 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 da. So what they're saying here is that, let's say, for example, you're using the block method, and you can still use the block method even when there's stems to compare. So let's look at the block method when discussing education in South Africa and Zimbabwe. So let's say, remember with the zigzag or the alternative method, you take the curriculum, you discuss it in Zimbabwe and in South Africa. Then you take the pedagogy, you discuss it in Zimbabwe and in South Africa. Then you take financing, you discuss in Zimbabwe and South Africa. So what would the block method look like? So in the block method, what you would do is you will take the curriculum, discuss it in South Africa, discuss pedagogy in South Africa, then discuss financing in South Africa. Now, when you're moving to B, which is Zimbabwe, you follow the same structure. Do not start with pedagogy and then go to financing and then follow the same structure. So when you're discussing Zimbabwe, start with the curriculum and then you move to pedagogy and then you end by financing. However, if there's no stem, they're discussing different things. If you're discussing the A, following the time, remember we spoke about this a bit earlier, following the time order, right? Make sure when you're also discussing the next point, you follow the time order. If you're doing so, maybe following, maybe you start by discussing, providing a definition, and then you go by providing the characteristics, and then you end up by providing the outcome. When discussing B, make sure you start by the definition, you go to the functions, and then you end by the characteristics. So what we're saying is that even if it's the block, you want to discuss A first and B, make sure you follow the same structure that you did in A and follow the same structure in B. So that is how you address the block method. So the block method is particularly useful in the following cases. You are unable to find points about A and B that are closely related to each other. Your ideas about B build upon or extend your ideas about A. You are comparing 3 or more subjects as opposed to the traditional 2. So you see that with the block, when comparing 3 things or 4 things or 5 things, the block might be better. You finish one, you go to the next, and so on and so forth. But the A, B, the zigzag, or the alternative method is very effective when comparing 2 things. Then, of course, your conclusion. a great compare and contrast essay needs a great conclusion. So what we mean here is you hopefully have proven your thesis about your two subjects. So even with the, let's say you're comparing the two types of education, South Africa and Zimbabwe, if your thesis states that Zimbabwe has the best education in Africa and or has the best education as compared to South Africa. So that is your thesis. In presenting these differences and similarities, you'll be able to show through the similarities and differences that Zimbabwe has a preferable form of education, or through the differences and similarities, you'll be able to show that South Africa has the best form of education, right? So your concluding paragraph is your chance to share any final insights and to reinforce your position. Do not introduce brand new information in your concluding paragraph. Use it to summarize the entire paper. So what I would like you to do in this activity is to please, if you can, read these questions, right? And just in the chat, I'm going to go back, if I can go back to the presentation. So we're just going to do one small activity before we end. For activity 1, right, you can see. So what I would like you to do is in the chat, if you can just simply indicate in the chat for me. So it's 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Number 1, do you think it's an expository essay, a narrative essay, argumentative essay, or comparative essay? Then you go to 2, you go to 3, and 4. Just to see if you can identify the type of essay from the questions that you have been asked to do. But this is just an activity. However, in most cases, the assignment instructions will tell you how to structure it or how to go about it. But it's also important that in reading the questions, I did provide some questions with each essays as we're going, and even with the table that kind of compared all the essays. So if you can please do this activity for me. So in the chat, just simply say 1 equals to argumentative, 2 equals to narrative, and so on and so forth. We just have 2 activities and then we conclude the session. Okay, so explore an experience that you think has only ever happened to you. Do you think that would be a narrative, an expository, argumentative, or comparative? Are there any similarities between? Okay, Katlego says 1 is narrative, 2 is descriptive, 3 is expository, and 4 is comparative. Okay, Katlego, you are very right. The first is definitely a narrative essay, right? The second could go for a descriptive as well as an expository. So you're right on that one, right? So it could work as a descriptive. It could also work as an expository. So you had that correct. And then the only thing is the last one, which is the what do you call, the argumentative essay, right? So the third one, free education is better for the future. That is a statement that was given to you and you have to take a side, right? So there you have to decide if free education is better for the future or it's not. So the question was asked like this, but most discussed questions need you to provide the for and the against. So do you think free education is actually better for the future, or do you think it will not be better? So there you have to present an argument, you refute it, and then you support it, right? So that would be an argumentative essay. And of course, the last one, a comparative essay. Excellent, excellent, Katlego. Excellent try. Excellent. So let's do the last one, right? Can the death penalty be effective? Define the meaning of life to you. Describe your favorite vacation with your family. Compare and contrast getting a job versus getting a degree. Okay, Innocent, is this for the first activity or the second activity? So Innocent, if it's for the first activity, the only difference is the only thing you missed out is point number 3, which is more of an argumentative essay because you need to take a stand, right? So let's do the second activity. Can the death penalty be effective? So the first one is, can the death penalty be effective? Do you think, what type of essay will that be? Then you have to define the meaning of life to you. Then describe your favorite vacation with your family. And then compare and contrast getting a job versus getting a degree. Okay, 1 is argumentative essay. 2 is narrative essay. 3 is the descriptive essay. And then 4 is the comparative essay. Okay, let's just continue. So Katlego, you got it right? So the first one is the argumentative essay, and then you narrate, you know, what life means to you. Then you describe your favorite family, and then of course the comparative, where you provide the similarities and the differences. Excellent. I'm glad that through the questions, you know, you're able to know the type of essays, because when you can identify the type of essay, then you know what structure to use, what type of thesis to use, and how to go about writing your essays. Excellent, guys. Excellent, Innocent. Yes, that's exactly it. So you indeed have, you know, the type of essays. So you all got it right. So excellent, guys. I'm so happy that you were able to identify the different essays. So as we end, do you have any questions for me? Any comments? Please remember, if there's any aspects of the presentation that you need clarity with, remember to book a session with me. I'll go through it with you. Thank you, guys.